A quiet suburban street in Wimbledon, southwest London, was home to Nathan Barnett. When the heir hunters take on his case, they discover his estate to be much larger than they expect.
We were stunned. £200,000 was left in Nathan's bank accounts.
And a seemingly simple investigation turns into a tough 6-month slog.
Unfortunately for us, it was a more drawn-out process than we'd have hoped.
It's going to be a busy day for the heir hunters, with 2 challenging cases to crack. Today, we uncover more about Britain's risque wartime history.
The owner of the Windmill came up with the idea of having nudes on the British stage.
And we learn how Jewish immigrants reaching British shores in the late 1800s faced a tough start.
The area was very dilapidated, with very few facilities. They would have lived something like 30 to a house.
It's a busy Monday morning at London-based heir hunting firm Finders. A new case has just come in via a private referral and is being handled by case manager Ryan Gregory.
OK, Ryan, so this is the Florence, June, Massie case. Have a look at the tree.
The only details the team have been given are Florence's name, address and her date of death. But Ryan has already tracked down records for her.
She passed away in September, a spinster. It looks like she was probably born in Holywell, but she passed away in Portsmouth in Hampshire.
The waterfront town of Southsea, Portsmouth, was home to Florence June Massie for more than 70 years. Known to her friends as June, she left a lasting impression on everyone she met.
June was a very happy person. She enjoyed music and loved the music and always had that little sparkle in her eye.
June moved into the Bluebells care home in Portsmouth in 2009, where she became good friends with Dizzy Page. Dizzy organised the home's activities, which June always took part in.
She loved the dressing up side of all of that, you know, putting hats and always wearing a hat. The Easter bonnets and the Halloween hats, and she'd wear a hat for any occasion.
She loved the outdoors and being close to nature, so she would never be too far from the garden.
June used to love sitting out here, just watching the birds. She'd sit many an afternoon, and we'd have the afternoon tea out here.
It was June's favourite spot, as she could watch her beloved birds in the garden's aviary.
June particularly enjoyed watching them have their bird baths, and there was a little yellow canary that used to come and sit here. It was a bright yellow canary, and she'd sit and talk to it, and it was very sweet, very special, yeah.
Sadly, Florence June Massie passed away on the 21st of September 2013. She was 85 years old. She died without making a will and with no known family, so the search is now on to find heirs to her estate. Research has revealed that Florence was born on the 13th of June 1928. Her parents were Frances Gordon Massie and Gladys Patty Dawson. The team know that Florence was a spinster, so having established she had no children of her own, the next job is to see if her parents had any other children.
What we've done is we have done a quick issue search to find out any siblings that she may have had. We have established that she had a sister that died a spinster.
With no descendants on this sister's line, Ryan and the team continue to look for more siblings.
There was a brother called Francis that passed away age 0, within the first year of being born. And then there's one other brother, also called Francis, but with a different middle name. They were just trying to find out what happened to him.
As neither of Florence's other siblings married or had children, Ryan and the team are trying to trace her brother, Francis Walter Massie.
At the moment, we know so far that he was born in 1924. We know he isn't married or wasn't married, so we just need to find out if he's still alive, where he is, or if he's passed away, whether he did have any children out there.
Although this case has been privately referred to the company, there are no guarantees that it won't also be published on the Treasury Solicitor's Bona Vacantia list of unclaimed estates, so time is of the essence. and it's not long before they come up with a lead on Florence's brother Francis.
As it stands, it doesn't particularly look like a tricky case. I mean, it can be a bit more difficult to find somebody if they're close kin, if they're relatively elderly. Sometimes someone drops off our databases if they're in a care home or if they've emigrated overseas.
But Ryan has managed to find a record for Francis. It dates back to 2004 and shows Francis living at the same address as his sister Florence, and they never parted.
June and Frank came here together in 2009, and I joined the Bluebell in about a couple of weeks after.
Francis had cared for June for many years, but when his health deteriorated, they moved into care together.
It's very sweet to have a brother and sister coming together, knowing that they've got each other to rely on. But sadly, that Frank died a week after being here. I believe that they were very close, and I believe that she was with him when he died and held his hand.
Back in the office, Ryan and the team are getting to grips with Francis's records.
We can assume that he was probably a bachelor if he was living with his sister for a lot of his life, but we're not sure. So it could be tricky if we can't find him. We're hoping that we'll be able to, or maybe just find a death entry for him.
And it isn't long before they locate some info.
We've actually just found out that he died in 2009 in Portsmouth, which is the right area. We've done a marriage search also, so we know that he died a bachelor, so we can draw a line under that, and then we're going to start to look into the maternal and paternal families.
Using census records, Ryan and the team are able to establish that Florence's grandparents, Francis Massie and Harriet Armstrong, had 6 children, including Florence's father, Francis Massie. The records also show that Florence's paternal family came from Chester.
It looks as though the Massie parents, the deceased grandparents, are alone on 1911, which suggests that the daughters and the son have all moved out, possibly married, so we're going to have to try and find out who each of the girls married, and then kind of find out if they had any children and go down from there.
Ryan begins to search the marriage indexes for Florence's Aunt Gladys.
If we start with the youngest, we'll be able to find a cousin who may still be alive, fingers crossed.
But they can't find a record of her, so the team begin to search the death indexes from 1890 for people with that name. Luckily,
there was only a handful. One of the death entries that came up in that search was a Gladys Beatrice Newbold. So it could be that she's just dropped the A name during her lifetime.
Ryan searches the marriage index again, using Gladys's newfound middle initial of A.
There is a Gladys A. Massie marrying a Henry J. Newbold. It's in Lambeth, so it's not in Chester, but it seems as though the family may have moved around a little bit.
And it transpires that whilst Gladys married her husband under the name Henry Newbold, just over a decade later, he would become one of the biggest stars of British wartime radio and be known to millions of listeners by his stage name, Clay Keyes.
Clay Keyes was a fast-talking, breezy kind of chap. He was a very pleasant man, always dressed very smartly. I seem to remember, in fact, that I seldom remember seeing him in anything other than a brown suit, rather similar to the jacket that I've got on today, in fact.
During World War II, Clay Keyes was the host of a radio variety show called The Old Town Hall, which ran for a staggering 64 weeks in its first series.
Although Clay was known as a comedian, he was the host of the Old Town Hall programme, so there wasn't so much direct comedy from him. It was more introducing parts of the programme that would take part. A typical variety show was a cast with an orchestra sitting behind them, 35-piece orchestra in many cases, and there was always a singer in the programme. Comedy tended to be more situation comedy. They were more scripted, of course, and they were acted.
Florence's Aunt Gladys also played an important role in Clay's comedy shows.
There was a sketch played by an actor named Richard Goulden called Old Ebenezer. He was supposed to be a night watchman, and they were scripted shows, The scripts, in fact, were written by Gladys Keyes. And eventually, when the Ebenezer sketches went out of favour, she became the actress and was Martha, the gossip carrier, in following series of that programme.
The popular shows were broadcast from the Mont Sanior, a converted new cinema in London, and always in front of a live audience.
There used to be a BBC ticket unit, and people used to apply to that ticket unit for admission to the shows, and they were never at a loss to find an audience for them. And they used to flock to all the theatres that we were using, regardless of the fact that there were bombs dropping at times.
Wartime comedy radio shows played a huge part in boosting morale during times of hardship.
Audiences wanted them to get out of the depression of the war, its starvation, its deaths. You couldn't be frivolous other than listening to a radio programme. The power of radio during the war was tremendous.
Comedy sketches and variety shows became a permanent fixture on BBC Radio after the war, and this can, in part, be put down to the success of Florence's Uncle Henry's famous sketch show.
The BBC had changed during the war completely. Instead of being just educative or serious all the time, it really thought that it ought to be a morale booster for the population. And more comedy programmes were created. Clay Keyes was valuable at the time, particularly with his programme, The Old Town Hall. It was an incredible favourite programme.
Back in the office, discovering Gladys and Henry's marriage has given Ryan a much-needed lead.
We're going to see if Gladys had any children. If one of them's still alive, then hopefully we'll be able to talk to them and they'll be able to say, yeah, my mum was from Chester and, you know, this was her background and her history, yeah.
To speed things up, Ryan sets the rest of the team searching for possible descendants of Florence's other maternal aunts.
Amy, was there a sister called Frances?
There's a Maud there as well. She's actually Frances Maud.
And she's born 1880. Okay.
Around her name.
Oh, you've got her onward. So you've got her 1911. 1911, she was with Gladys and the dad, Gordon, and Lillian as well. So we know Lillian was a spinster.
Yeah.
But the search is quickly thrown into confusion as Florence's aunts seem to be listed under many different names.
OK, right, so Lillian Massie,
Yes.
the aunt, what we found out is that she was single in 1911.
Yeah. Did she drop her middle names?
To Ryan's frustration, names have been swapped, dropped and changed, making it impossible to find exact matches for Florence's aunts.
So I think the only well, it might be the only answer is to check all of those marriages, but that death is possible.
Okay.
It's not exact, but it's possible.
I'm going to get the birth and then we'll try and find a death.
Take it from there. OK.
Cheers, Tony.
And as research continues, the search becomes ever more complicated and things don't quite work out the way Ryan wants.
You're kind of going on your own steam and hoping that it's going to be a quick case. Unfortunately for us, it was a more drawn-out process than we'd have hoped.
The busy borough of Wimbledon, southwest London, was home to Nathan Barnett. He'd lived in London since he was born in 1923, and throughout his life, Nathan worked as a civil servant, a bookseller, and a librarian. He lived in a modest flat and was a popular figure with his neighbours.
He was a very nice gentleman, very upright, nicely dressed, and always very pleasant when you met him, but very private.
As neighbours go, very well behaved and quiet. A reserved man, probably very good, going to church, doing the good deeds.
He always went religiously to church, and I think he was involved in the church as well.
Nathan was a cultured man who liked to travel and catch plays and operas in the West End, and he had a very striking appearance.
He had lovely, lovely silver grey hair, and it was so thick, beautiful hair, and he's always neat and tidy.
Sadly, Nathan passed away on the 15th of March 2012. A friend organised his funeral, and he was buried in a Catholic cemetery in Brighton. But Nathan hadn't written a will, so his home was simply closed up and left. It was more than a year after his death that Nathan's case became known to London-based heir hunting firm Fraser & Fraser.
The case of Nathan's didn't really come from a usual source. One of the neighbours phoned up to say that there was an empty house, been left dormant for over a year in the street, and asked really if we could help sort it out.
Cases are usually published on the Treasury solicitor's bona vacantia list of unclaimed estates, but this wasn't one that the team had come across before.
This situation is quite unusual because there was a friend of the deceased who was dealing with his funerals and trying to sort out his affairs. Now, unfortunately, they were a little lost about what to do and didn't really refer it to the council. In most situations, these properties get referred to the council and they then sort them out or pass it on to the Treasury solicitor. So this is quite unusual, with the family really becoming lost in the paperwork and not having the authority to do any more work.
On first inspection, it would seem that the property was owned by Nathan. This was good news for the heir hunters, as it could make this a high-value case.
We checked the land registry to see if his name was on the title deeds. For a surprise to us, it wasn't on the deeds. A gentleman by the name of Thomas Gibson Bell was on there, so it could have been possible the deceased was actually renting the property and it had been empty because the landlord hadn't done anything with it, so therefore the case could have been not worth us pursuing. So we needed to make a bit more of an investigation into who Thomas Gibson Bell was.
This was a huge blow for the team. If Nathan had in fact rented the property, then it wouldn't be worth pursuing, but they didn't give up that quickly.
We had to have a look at the electoral register to see who Thomas Gibson Bell was, and it appeared that he was living with the deceased for a number of years, but he disappeared in 1986, which is usually an indication that a person has died.
Mike checked the death indexes for that year and confirmed that he had indeed passed away. The team then tracked down a will left by Thomas and was surprised by its instructions.
When we got a copy of the will, we noticed that Nathan David Barnett was the heir to that will and therefore inherited most of his estate.
Now that they'd confirmed that the property did in fact belong to Nathan, the search was on to find heirs to his estimated £330,000 estate.
We discovered that Nathan was not married and he never had any children. We then had to go backwards through the family to see if he had any brothers and sisters that may be still alive.
The team traced Nathan's birth record, which gave them his mother's maiden name. This information then allowed them to trace a marriage certificate for Nathan's parents.
Now, the names that we had were Barnett and Friedman. Unfortunately, we couldn't locate a marriage record straight away, as the parents of the deceased, the father's name was actually Lazarus Bronstein, not Barnett.
Nathan's father, Lazarus Bronstein, was born in Russia in the late 1800s. As a young man, he, like almost 2 million others, were forced to flee their homeland.
A large number of Jews arrived from Eastern Europe at the turn of the century because there were numerous pogroms against them. They were blamed for the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, and therefore they left in very large numbers from the Russian Empire.
Lazarus made the long trip to the UK and settled in East London. 95% of the population there were Jewish, and Nathan's father stayed for many years.
The refugees headed to London because it was, of course, the largest city in the world at the time. It was the centre of the British Empire.
In London, Nathan's grandfather met his wife Annie Friedman, who had also fled from Russia.
Life for the Barnett family, as for all the Jewish immigrants at the turn of the century, would have been very hard indeed. And the area was very dilapidated, with very few facilities. They would have lived something like 30 to a house. And they were exploited not only by their employers, but by the landlords of these properties as well.
Many Jewish immigrants from that time changed their names. Lazarus would have changed his name from Bronstein to Barnett in the hope of an easier start.
He wanted to appear anglicised. It might have had reason to do with reasons for finding employment or setting up a business. He would have found it easier to be anglicised.
Lazarus did find a job as a tailor. It was a semi-skilled job which had opportunities to rise up the ladder. He worked on Berwick Street in Soho, where the rag trade still thrives today.
Berwick Street became a major centre of Jewish tailoring in London, And when the Taylors really came over from the East End of London, there were very close links between Soho and the East End. And Brake Street, and really until the 1960s, remained an almost entirely Jewish street. It had kosher restaurants, Jewish-owned dress shops.
Eventually, the Jewish community began to move away from the East End of London.
Their main move came place as a result of the Second World War. The borough of Stepney, which we're in now, was the most bombed borough in the whole of Britain because of the docks and because of its proximity to the City of London. So a lot of the houses were destroyed.
Jewish people began to move to northwest London and Essex, and very few are left in the East End today.
Jews wanted to improve themselves all the time. They wanted better conditions, better living conditions for themselves and for their children. They wanted better schooling. So inevitably they moved out, particularly to Essex. And most of the Jews who live in Essex now came from the East End of London.
Using the surname of Bronstein, the team were able to trace a marriage certificate for Lazarus and birth certificates for his children. Records revealed that Lazarus Bronstein married Annie Friedman on the 12th of June 1904 in Whitechapel, London, and the couple went on to have 8 children, including Nathan. This meant that Mike now had to track down these brothers and sisters of Nathan and their descendants.
It made it slightly more difficult for us because we weren't sure what names they were using when they were registering their children. Now, if they were using a variation of names, then we'd have to check under quite a few different possibilities to make sure that we had the full extent of Nathan's family.
And the team soon began to uncover more information about Nathan's non-conformist lifestyle.
He was only a black sheep, like my mum, because they didn't follow the Jewish faith.
Heir hunters track down thousands of rightful beneficiaries every year, but not all cases are cracked. There are thousands of estates on the Treasury's unclaimed list that have eluded the heir hunters and remain unsolved. And every week, more names are published. If you want to know if you could be in line to inherit an unclaimed estate, go to www.gov.uk and search for Bonaventia and click on Unclaimed Estates lists. Do you recognise a name on the list? Could it be a long-lost family member? If so, you could be in line for a windfall.
To claim an estate of someone who's died intestate, you need to trace your relationship in a direct line from the deceased person's grandparent. They need to supply us with certificates of birth, death and marriage and identity documents as well.
As well as the deceased person's name, there will be other bits of information on the list that can help you work out a family connection. For example, the year of their birth. Often the town they were born in and the place of death is published. Sometimes details of their spouse and the place of their marriage are given. All of this can give you clues to a long-lost relative and a potential claim of inheritance.
When considering a claim for an estate, it's very important that a person puts forward a very good case, and it's all based on the evidence. What we need are the birth, death, marriage certificates, perhaps something on adoption, and then we consider the evidence very carefully.
If an estate is left unclaimed for 12 years, all the money left behind will eventually go into government funds. Heir hunting company Finders and case manager Ryan Gregory are hot on the trail of heirs to the £50,000 estate of Florence June Massie. She lived in the Bluebells nursing home in Portsmouth with her devoted brother Francis. When Francis sadly passed away, she became good friends with Dizzy Page.
June and I had quite a special relationship because I spent a lot of one-to-one time with her. We'd go out for trips out and we'd spend a lot of time in her room, sitting and chatting. I will remember June as a special lady, yeah. We gelled, and I felt like I was her friend and perhaps her only person at the end.
June and her brother Francis were inseparable. Francis had devoted his life to June and was her sole carer, right up until his death. Before then, they did everything together.
I've been told that this park is where June and Frank used to walk and spend many happy hours here, just walking around the park. To me, it's got a real nice feel to it, and I can imagine them two having plenty of afternoons, great afternoons, yeah. I miss June, and this is a very special place for her, and I'm glad that I can be here today to think about her and Frank walking around and enjoying the sunshine here.
It's been several months since Ryan and the team started searching for heirs to Florence's estate. Having discovered her Aunt Gladys married Henry Newbold in London in 1928, they've been able to trace the couple's only daughter.
So whilst we found one of these paternal cousins pretty early on in our research, and we contacted her immediately, unfortunately she wasn't able to provide us with much more information on the family.
Heirs can be a great source of information about other family members, sometimes saving the heir hunters hours, even weeks of complex research. But in this case, sadly, things weren't that simple.
It's frustrating for us when we contact a beneficiary quite quickly and they're not able to give us any more information. It just means that we have to go back to the drawing board and go through all the processes.
The team continued their search for any other cousins Florence might have had on both her mother's and her father's side of the tree. Florence's parents were Francis Massie and Gladys Patty Dawson. According to their marriage certificate, Florence's father worked as a hallmarker at the Chester Assay Office. Hallmarkers like Francis were responsible for authenticating every piece of silver, gold and platinum sold in Britain.
The assaying of precious metals is just to guarantee a certain amount of precious metal within the alloy. So, for example, if you go out and you buy a piece of sterling silver product off the marketplace, you know it's made up of 92.5% silver, the other part is copper. Simple as that.
Hallmarking dates back to the 1300s, when Edward I of England passed a law requiring any item made of silver, which was for sale, to be at least equal quality to that of the coin of the realm. When items were passed by the wardens of the Goldsmiths Company, they received the King's Mark of Authentication, the hallmark.
Ours have obviously got the leopard's head for London. Chester would have had its own town mark, which was the sword and the wheat sheaths, and then the date letter for that specific year. So since 1478, each year, appropriate year, has had its own date letter, primarily, so you can date a piece to a very specific period of time.
This series of marks, once applied, gave the articles full provenance and were the oldest form of consumer protection. Florence's father was working at the Assay Office in 1912, which would have been a busy time as silver goods were in high demand.
Throughout, especially in the 1900s, the product that would probably been hitting Chester more than anything else would have been watch cases coming in still from Liverpool and Coventry and those sort of areas for mass exportation primarily to the colonies. My own pocket watch, which I wear on a regular occasion, is actually hallmarked for 1907. And funny enough, it's actually a Chester hallmark.
Demand for silver goods reached its peak during the Victorian era.
There was so much product wanted by the consumer at that period of time, and it was really a first buzz of the consumerism that we are all now used to. The Victorians especially had just an accoutrement for just about everything that you went through, from eating your breakfast, i.e. silver toast racks, right through to when you went to bed with silver hot water bottles and things like that. So.
But the 20th century brought cheaper imports and changing lifestyles, and the demand for silver goods began to decline.
Primarily fuelled by, obviously, people not wanting product anymore. Things slowly went out of fashion. Tastes changed massively. And because of that, obviously, closures of assay offices followed suit.
The Chester Assay Office closed its doors in 1962, ending almost 200 years of its hallmarking history.
Chester hallmarks are becoming increasingly more popular and more collectible as they become rarer, obviously, since the Assay Office closed in 1962.
Although Ryan and the team had uncovered interesting information about Florence's deceased relatives, they were still struggling to find more heirs to her estate. They were trying to track down descendants of her Aunt Mildred, the youngest of her father's 5 siblings.
The line of Mildred Massie was probably the most complicated line that we had to research on the whole family tree. We had a few situations happen that does make our research a little bit more difficult. One of them being that Mildred actually married twice, so we're dealing with change of surname through marriage.
The team had found that Florence's Aunt Mildred had a daughter, Maud, with her first husband, William Newton. In 1910, she married a James Fawkes Lowe and went on to have another 4 children. They were all first cousins once removed, and they or their descendants would be heirs to her estate.
One of the Lowe children was a Francis Lowe. He was the last born of that family. We found a marriage for him. We then did a birth search in order to find out how many children he had, and one of those was Peter Lowe.
Francis Lowe had 2 children, a daughter and a son, Peter, who were Florence's first cousins once removed, and Peter recalls the moment he first heard from the heir hunters.
It was just a normal morning. I was looking at the post and there was this letter from heir hunters, and I passed it over to Janet for her to have a look at. I didn't really think a great deal of it, and a few minutes later Janet said, "I think you'd better read this." And it was the tone of her voice that sort of made me prick my ears up, actually.
Peter and his wife already have an interest in genealogy.
Well, we know quite a lot about my paternal side through Janet's researches over the last 20, 30 years. So, but it still came as a surprise to find that we hadn't got everybody. I'd never heard of the name Florence Massie. It was a complete mystery to me.
The couple had built up a huge catalogue of their relatives from Peter's grandfather's side of the family, but his grandmother's side needed more investigating.
I went on the internet and found her death, and from that I was able to piece together where she'd come from, which part of the family. Florence is here on the map, and her father was Gordon Massie, and her mother was Gladys Patty Dawson.
Contact from the heir hunters was the first time they'd heard of a relative named Florence.
I was a little bit sad to think that she died without apparently anybody being around, so it's always sad that a sad, lonely death. So obviously I'm pleased to be a beneficiary, but I do feel a little bit of sadness that it ended up from her point of view as it did.
But the news did allow these keen genealogists to conclude 30 years of research and complete their family tree.
I've learned an awful lot more about my paternal side. It's been very exciting, very interesting, and we found quite a lot of very surprising facts and some quite intriguing information about various members that we would never have known otherwise.
Peter isn't the only one who waited a long time to wrap up his research. In the end, this case took the heir hunters almost 6 months to complete.
The case of Florence June Massie was a real example of a case that you need patience and persistence in order to push through all the research and find all the heirs that are entitled.
Many of Florence's older relatives changed or dropped their names. Her Aunt Mildred married twice, creating a complicated tree. And the first heir the team located was unable to confirm or add to any of their findings. This run of bad luck led to a challenging 6 months, but Ryan and his team finally brought the case of Florence June Massie to a pleasing end.
All in all, there was 26 heirs to this case, which is a large number for us to get through. It was a really good case for us to crack. We managed to contact all the beneficiaries without coming across any competition, which is great for us.
At heir hunting company Fraser & Fraser, case manager Mike Powell has been tracking down heirs to Nathan Barnett's estate, which he believed to be around £330,000. The team had discovered that Nathan was one of 8 children born to his Jewish parents, Lazarus and Annie Bronstein. They changed their name to Barnett after moving from Russia in the late 1800s, and it seems that this pattern was repeated throughout the next generation.
With some of the children, it was slightly difficult because they'd changed their names to something that kind of resembled their name but wasn't their name. Something from Solly to Sydney is going to cause problems when we're trying to look for marriages and death records.
However, one sister of Nathan's was relatively easy to trace. Bessie Barnett was born in 1921 into the strong Jewish community of Stepney, East London. But in her early 20s, she was to embark on a career that would set her apart from her traditional Jewish roots, when she became a dancer at Soho's infamous Windmill Club.
The Windmill, for me, is really our version of the Moulin Rouge. In 1932, in order to revitalise their shows, the owner of the Windmill came up with the idea of having nudes on the British stage. Now, this had never been done before, and so they had to approach the Lord Chamberlain to ask permission. So the Lord Chamberlain agreed, but under three stipulations, and that was that the ladies were never allowed to move, that they had to be presented in an artistic fashion, and that they had to perform with very subdued lighting. So in this way, they managed to have, for the first time, full nudes on the British stage.
The Windmill shows caused a sensation. Not surprisingly, they were a huge hit with the soldiers of World War II, but they also drew in some of London's finest. For Bessie in the 1950s, it would have been worlds apart from the family life she left behind.
Their shows were attended by the aristocracy, by politicians, by ordinary people, by celebrities, and they went wild for this idea. It wasn't just the nude tableaus. The Windmill launched the career of some amazing comedians, had some amazing variety artists, so it became a massive favourite, particularly during the war for the soldiers.
But the excitement of something different would sometimes bring out the mischievous side of the soldiers, who would go to the theatre with mice in their pockets.
They used to place the mice on the floor in the hope that they would scuttle onto the stage and scare the Windmill girls into moving and running around whilst they were nude, which of course they weren't allowed to do.
These exciting new shows helped the Windmill become an unlikely symbol of London's wartime resilience.
They never closed during the war, and especially during the Blitz. And even during the 12-day period of compulsory closure for all theatres, the Windmill company kept rehearsing. So their slogan became, "We never closed."
At this time, the Blitz would have brought out the fighting spirit in Bessie.
Girls like Bessie must have been real characters. I think to have that strength and that zeal, that commitment to really want to seize the moment, which is very much a Blitz spirit, particularly in Soho. You wouldn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. She must have been a very vibrant person, a very exciting person, and I think really embodies that kind of fun, exuberant spirit of the Blitz, really, and of London.
For many years, the Windmill continued to do a roaring trade. But with the rise of the more liberated 60s, it was seen as dated, and it eventually closed. Today, it's reopened and is trading very clearly on its risque past. Back in the office, things were also about to get more revealing for heir hunter Mike Powell.
We found out that out of the 8 siblings, including Nathan, 6 of them had married. And although they'd all predeceased, they all seemed to have had children.
The team found that many of Nathan's nieces and nephews were still alive. They tracked them down and contacted each person individually. Some of the first heirs that Mike got in contact with were Nathan's nieces, Gloria and Penny, both daughters of windmill dancer Bessie. The sisters lost touch with their uncle when their mum died in 1998 and didn't know he had passed away until the heir hunters got in touch.
I felt really sad, but mainly because I thought that he was alone and we hadn't been informed. And I felt sad because of my mum too, because it was her favourite, well, it was her youngest brother and they were really close. So immediately we just wanted to find out why and where he was buried so that we could do that for our mum.
Gloria hadn't seen her uncle for many, many years, but he certainly left a lasting impression.
My last memory of my uncle was probably when I was a child at a funeral, and my memories of him always that he was like a 1920s film star. And he reminded me of someone out, you know, like the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, you know, that style sort of thing. I just really remember him as being very tall, very handsome, and sparkly eyes.
Gloria's sister Penny had more recent memories of her uncle.
I did have a chance meeting with him in St James's Park one day in my lunch hour, and I recognised him immediately by his hair, the family hair, the grey hair, and he was very tall and elegant and well-dressed, how I'd always remembered him and how my mum had always spoken of him, that was what he was like. So I stopped him and he knew immediately who I was, and we had a long chat and sat down on a bench and then we went our separate ways, and, you know, so that's my last memory of my Uncle Nat.
Like Penny's mum Bessie, Nathan broke away from the family and didn't have much contact with them.
I think he was only a black sheep, like my mum, because they didn't follow the Jewish faith. They both left. That I think it came from their childhood. My Uncle Nat may have felt a bit of pressure when he was younger to conform to the Jewish faith, and it probably made him rebel as he got older. He was a very flamboyant character. He was very well-travelled, very well-educated. He had his partner Tom that he lived with, and he travelled around the world with him, and they had a lovely lifestyle. And that way I do think he was also born before his time, because his generation wouldn't have been so open as he was about his sexuality. So I'm really pleased he was able to live his life how he wanted to live it.
Once Mike and the team had contacted all of the heirs, they were then able to access Nathan's property, where they discovered one last surprise.
Because we search the property thoroughly, we often find different assets, bank accounts. This case, though, we were stunned. £200,000 was left in Nathan's bank accounts. That's a huge amount of money. It takes the whole value of this estate to well over £500,000.
In total, the 13 heirs that the team traced are now entitled to their share of Nathan's estate, valued at over £500,000. But for Penny and her own family, this hasn't been about the money.
We're much happier now we know that he had a nice funeral with friends that attended, and he had a Catholic ceremony which he would have loved, and he'd love where he was buried. It's a beautiful place, so we're a lot happier about that.
Just the stairs in the